100 years. 100 years of telling the stories of ECU, Greenville, and the surrounding areas. Join me, Cannon Gates, the station manager for WZMB 91.3 FM, and Diego Lerma, the editor-in-chief of the East Carolinian, as we celebrate the East Carolinian's 100-year milestone on this audio journey.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Century Long Voyage podcast. In this episode, we have a conversation with Matthew Prensky, former editor-in-chief at the East Carolinian.
Matthew, thank you for joining us on a century-long voyage. I'll let Diego start us off.
All right, Matthew, do you mind introducing yourself and letting us know who you are?
My name is Matthew Prensky. I was the editor-in-chief of the East Carolinian from 2018 to 2019. I worked at the East Carolinian for all 4 years of my college life, which the award was named Crazy 8 for a reason, because I think you have to be slightly crazy to do it. And ever since, I went into journalism, and now I work in communication.
How did you first hear about Tech during your freshman year?
It was a flyer on the bulletin board in Joyner Library that I walked by probably 6 weeks into my freshman year, and I saw it and I thought, that's probably a good way to get involved in campus, a good way to write. And, I came from a very news-focused family. My parents both liked the news and kept up with it, and so I was very interested in the news. But I never thought of journalism as a career path until I saw that flyer, and until I kind of connected the dots of, oh wait, yeah, this actually could be something interesting. So yeah, I went through the tryouts and everything else was history.
And for our listeners who don't know, do you mind telling them what Where's the Fire and what There's the Smoke, the article you wrote?
Yeah, that was a whole bunch of articles I wrote my junior year of college about the Greenville Fire Rescue Department and the sort of work environment inside the fire department, and how the toxicity in the fire department and the work culture, how it was affecting public safety, how it was affecting their ability to respond to emergencies, and just how dangerous it was becoming for residents of the city of Greenville. And so it turned into a lot of stories. It didn't make a lot of impact while I was at ECU, but in the long term, there have been a lot of positive changes as far as I understand. So it was a very long, drawn-out investigative series that took a lot of work.
How did the story make its way to you?
So I had a bunch of friends who were volunteer firefighters in the area. They didn't work for Greenville Fire Rescue, but they were volunteer firefighters who worked in Winterville and other departments. And so they knew that I worked for the East Carolinian. I think they knew that I was a slightly aggressive reporter, not in a bad way, just sort of I had a Calvin Mercer. I don't know if he's still in Greenville. I don't know what he's up to. He called me the most dogged reporter he'd ever seen when I was, 20, 21 years old. And I took that as a badge of honor, even though I don't think he meant it as a compliment. So they knew that it would pique my interest. They had gone to I think they'd gone to the Daily Reflector before and the TV stations, and there just wasn't interest. My friends approached me about it, connected me with some firefighters, and, between talking to them and trying to pull public records and all of that, that's how I, brought it together in a summer.
During that whole year, in every paper, there was a story about the fire department, and that you had an Excel sheet with all the information planned out. Is that true? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I don't remember the Excel sheet necessarily, but yeah, it was basically every paper, which in hindsight was probably a little bit much. I don't know if I would have done that in hindsight, but yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things where there was so much going on in the fire department, and there were so many different things to report on. And once the first story came out, the second story came out, more firefighters came forward and wanted to talk, and more public records started coming through, the story kept going. And it was eventually I had to sort of take a step back because I became EIC. And, I think there was a hard and fast rule that EICs can't write. They got to focus on running the operation. And so I had to sort of give it up at that point, which I was fine with. Taking up over a year of my life at that point. So it was time.
Did you end up passing that to the different reporters?
Yeah, I passed it to two reporters that I had trained when I was news editor, and I trained them and they were interested in it. I think they did a little bit of reporting, but by that time there were other things going on, and so, it ran its course.
So looking back, is there anything we would have done differently when it comes to the reporting of the story?
I don't know. I don't know if I would have written as many stories. I still to this day, and maybe Anna can explain this better than I can. The day before that, the first story went to publish, I was tasked with making sure Greenville Fire Rescue gave me a comment, and just we made sure to get their side of the story. And so I started calling and emailing their PIO, and just was getting no answer, even though I knew she was available because I would text the firefighters that worked at the station number 1, and she was in the building. She wasn't doing anything. I knew she was around. It just felt like she was dodging me. And so by 4:00, I told Javeria, who was the managing editor at the time, and Anna what was going on, or maybe I told them earlier in the afternoon. And they just told me, keep going, let's really try and get a comment from them. And so I think at 4 or 5 o'clock, I just sort of cut it off and said, okay, we've tried. We've called them more than a dozen times. We've emailed them a few times. I think I texted her a couple times. And so we just went forward with the story. And it was maybe 10 o'clock at night, I think on a Monday night, that I got a call from ECU police. It was a police officer who told me that they were investigating a complaint of harassment, that a police report had been filed against me for harassment by someone at Greenville Fire Rescue. And it was all fine the next day. I remember the student affairs had to get involved, I think, at that point, and sort of intervene with ECU police and sort of explain what happened and everything going on. They dropped, the complaint, and nothing ever happened. But yeah, that was, I think, between trying to preserve a sort of friendly-ish relationship, not writing as many stories, I think those were the two things that I look back on and wish I kind of did differently.
From your recollection, what was the community's response to the reporting?
I mean, I remember the journalism department I remember their reaction really well. Brian Massey loved it. He went crazy for it because the capstone for a communications major is like investigative reporting. And so he thought it was great. And all my other journalism professors kind of gave up teaching me journalism at that point. They were just sort of like, okay, he gets it. We'll just, he just needs to come to class and that's it. But yeah, the community response, I think I think the firefighting community loved it. I think they finally felt like someone was listening to them and trying to get change brought about. Well, I know for a fact that there were a couple of city council members at the time, and PJ Conley was one of them, who really liked the fact that these stories were coming out because he had a lot of friends who were firefighters. And even though they liked it privately, they didn't do anything publicly, which was frustrating at times. But, I think there were pockets of the community. I still don't really know how much the general public picked up on it. I think they did a little bit because once I started doing the reporting, then WNCT and WITN and the Daily Reflector started doing a bit of reporting. And so it reached more of the general public. But there were certain pockets that really appreciated it, and others, who knows?
Well, Matthew, I know. So you guys were still in the downtown office when you were your whole time, if I'm correct, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I know. So I am the WZMB station manager. I want to know, since obviously 2 different buildings, not as like how it is now, where we're all literally right across the hall from each other. Did y'all have any collaboration, or was it pretty minuscule at the time?
So I was EIC right when the conversations were starting to happen about moving to Mendenhall. And it was a long-term problem where the student newspaper, tech was downtown, advertising was downtown, the magazines were downtown. And yeah, the radio station was in Mendenhall in the basement where it smelled like milk and mold, and it was disgusting. And so no one wanted to go down there. And yeah, we all knew that it was a problem. We all knew everyone was siloed. We were all sort of friends because we all took journalism classes together or communications classes together, but we didn't really hang out that much and we didn't really collaborate that much. And so that was the genesis for why we wanted to move on campus. And I will tell you this, I didn't like the idea. I really didn't want to move to campus because by that point I was parking at the stadium, taking the bus to campus, going to classes all day, taking the bus back to the stadium, driving home, going to downtown. I did not like the idea of having to park on campus or having to park at the stadium for 12, 14 hours from 8 a.m. in the morning till 1 a.m. at night. I didn't like the idea. Obviously, I lost that debate, and I'm glad I lost the debate. I think it's worked out well in the end. But yeah, I mean, because this is going to age me, and I recognize that. But I don't think the parking deck that's right behind Joyner was done until my senior year. I mean, when I was at ECU, it was just flat blacktop. I didn't like it, but I saw the value in it. And I think it led to a lot of great things because I think, a lot of you guys do collaborate a lot more than in the past, which was something that we started really to drive in the last couple of years that I was there.
Yeah, I mean, you're clear on those tech spurts and this now, obviously. So I think it has worked out great in the end, especially with me and Diego being able to work alongside each other.
Yeah, I mean, the head of the radio station when I was there was Kayla, and she and I both had wanted to do more together, but I think it really did become an issue at the end of the day. We were just in separate locations. It was a pain in the butt to get over there because we were on 3rd Street, and so it's 10 or 15-minute walk just to get back to campus, and then you got to walk halfway across campus. And being downtown, especially at production nights, it was a bit of a safety issue because, especially for reporters or editors that came out, I had to remind people at times, Anna and editor-in-chiefs before me had to remind people at times that if you're going to leave, you're not walking. You have to get someone to drive you back to campus because we knew people hung out around downtown. We didn't want anyone to get sort of bothered or worse. So, yeah, I mean, again, it was the right move. I was just being stubborn and not wanting to accept change where it was needed.
So when it comes to production nights, you just mentioned it. How did that run during that downtown office time?
We got the newspaper out every time. I will stick to that. There were definitely nights that I was there till 2 a.m. It was a long night most nights, which again was fun because, we were next to a bunch of, restaurants. And so we could get food pretty easily. A bunch of us would always walk down to Jimmy John's and get Jimmy John's and bring it back or something like that, which was nice. And at some point, I think one of the nice things about the downtown location was we were all kind of packed in there for at least 8 hours from 4 o'clock till midnight. And so it did allow everyone to grow really close. I mean, it wasn't a party because we were getting work done, but in a sense it was laughing and joking around, and sports team was always watching sports and coming up with whatever hot take they had, and Arts that sat across from them was always telling them to shut up or goofing off with them. And meanwhile, I'm held up in a tiny office trying to run the chaos and edit and steer whatever issue comes up. And so it was a lot of fun nights, and there were a lot of fun memories made. And then, for me, again, one of the things I liked about the downtown office is you get out at 12 a.m. or 1 a.m. or 11 o'clock or whatever it was. And at that point, on a Monday night, unless you're going back to 5th Street, or Wednesday night, again, if you're going back towards main part of downtown, it's a dead area. I mean, it was a ghost town at that point. And so there was something really nice about getting to drive home when the city was so quiet, because you're coming from such a stressful, chaotic environment, and then being able to have that 20 minutes to drive home was very nice and very therapeutic. They were some of my favorite nights at ECU, was getting to experience that kind of juxtaposition.
Is there any one specific production night that sticks out in your mind when you think about production nights?
honestly, I've repressed all of those traumatic memories. I think the ones that stick out to me the most are the ones where reporters turned in stories late, and so we didn't even get sections ready to edit until 8 or 9 o'clock, and then we had to speed edit them. And then designers who, and bless their hearts, I mean, they were doing great work and dealing with our chaos. They were clamoring for, please give us stories so we can start laying everything out. Please let us do our work. And so we're having to manage that and getting sections done. And of course, you're trying to, especially on Monday nights, you want the news, the section chiefs and section editors want to get out so they can go down to Subdogs or go down to wherever. And so you're having to tell them, hey, slow down. Let's make sure we get this right. And then they leave inevitably, and you have to call them back or call them because an issue came up. It's nights like those where there's that little bit of chaos that at the time felt like they rapidly aged me. But looking back, they were a lot of fun and moments that I miss.
Is there any other challenges that you remember during your time as either editor-in-chief or?
The investigative series was a big challenge. I think there was always the challenge of, because we had a couple of we had a couple of chancellors for a little while I was there that chancellor and then the head of the UNC system, who I don't want to say had questionable backgrounds, but it was clear they were doing things in the background that were not acceptable. Like Professor Massey would be a good one to talk about that. And so that was one of those times where we had to be kind of careful about how we report on that, because it's one thing if you go after the city for something, they can't really do that much. But if you go after a chancellor or senior administrator or something like that, that was always tricky. It was always really tricky to report on Greek life. I mean, that was every year it was an issue because we wanted to form a bond with them and a relationship with them because, there were staff members that were part of Greek life, but maybe they didn't trust us. That's fine. Or maybe they just didn't want coverage, even if it was us promoting their events. But, that's a whole part of campus that we wanted to cover, that it was a challenge to cover. I think those were always the issues. And obviously there's always an issue of getting stories turned in on time, making sure all of the beats that we really need to get covered. Photographers were an issue when I was there because they were basically freelance. And so you couldn't force them to go take photos. And sometimes they would. And we had a couple of great photographers who would do that work. But at other times, they could be a little flaky, and that was always a bit of a headache.
Yeah, I'm dealing with that problem right now too.
God, the critiques that we would get, I think photos were always one. AP style was absolutely always one. And I sucked at AP style. It's one of the things that I always look back and say, I don't know why they chose me because I sucked at editing. So yeah, photographers are, I don't know. I don't know how to fix that. I could never come up with a solution. I guess it's just part of the DNA.
Yeah. My solution was have all my reporters just take pictures with their phones.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. And frankly, that's kind of a great practice or a great thing for them to get into the practice of doing, because that's what you're going to have to do out in the sort of professional world as a journalist. And so you're not always going to have a photographer, so you guys might as well get used to it. I think there was a little bit of pushback, though, and also just a little bit of, some reporters didn't understand what they should take photos of when they're talking about certain stories, and so you had to brainstorm with them and come up with ideas. And of course, when you're talking about a staff of 20 to 30 reporters, maybe 20 reporters, that your story slipped through the cracks, and so you can't get it right with every one of them.
What was your biggest takeaway from your experience at Tech?
Ooh, I mean, again, when I went into college, I think I was a business major, and I had no plans to go into business. I hated the idea of it. It was just my guidance counselor told me that's what would get me in, and I think my biggest takeaway was it helped me figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and it sort of gave me a career trajectory that I never thought I would take. And it taught me a lot more lessons about journalism. And I apologize to the communications department because this is not going to sound great, but it taught me a lot more about journalism than I learned in class. Because, and I think I told a couple of professors this, but it's one thing to give people sort of a fake assignment of, hey, here's how to write a story. But there's something about the real world experience and the pressure of a deadline and the sort of, doing it in real life that you learn a lot more and you learn a lot faster. And so, not only did it give me a whole career path that I'm still on, but, it taught me all the lessons that I still rely on today.
So you mind telling us a little bit about your time after graduation, like what kind of jobs you went into after or what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I graduated in spring 2019. I immediately went to work at Gannett. I worked in Maryland for 2 years as a sort of tourism reporter, politics reporter a bit, and sort of investigative reporter a bit. After that, I went back to North Carolina to Wilmington, and I was a regional investigative reporter for 2.5 years, focused on Eastern North Carolina. And about 2 years ago, I moved back to DC where I grew up, and I joined a public interest law firm, and I kind of do a mixture of writing and sort of private investigating for them, looking for, unconstitutional situations that we can get involved in, whether it's suing or releasing statements or sending nasty letters telling cities or states to cut it out, or doing anything and everything under our power to stop it. So I don't want to say I left journalism because I think to a certain extent I'm still involved in it, but I made a little bit of a transition a couple of years ago, and I miss journalism sometimes, but I think I'm still doing really meaningful work. And so, I'm happy where I'm at.
Last question. What would you like to tell the staff now, either reporters or people in higher positions?
Ooh, geez. I think the best advice I could give them, or at least the advice that I always wanted to get in school, because I was coming out of college going a year before COVID. And so, the industry was going through a lot of turbulence before COVID, and then after COVID, it went crazy, and it's still having a lot of issues today. I think the best piece of advice that I would give to reporters and everyone is, it's really easy to get scared and hung up on just the constant headlines about layoffs and career uncertainty. But I wouldn't focus on that. To a certain extent, you can control your destiny in journalism. If you really make yourself valuable to an organization, there's less of a chance that they're going to lay you off. And so the big part about getting into journalism and really making a home for yourself is creating value for yourself, doing all the stories and then some, really adding value to your stories, really building relationships with the community and sources. And so if your organization is at that point where they have to cut staff or they have to do furloughs or something like that, because you're so valuable to the organization, they're not going to look to you, to be that cut. And I tried to do that for a lot of years, and it just turned into a situation where I was a regional investigative reporter, and that is not an essential role. And I was very lucky that I had such a great relationship with my editor, and I was doing all that work to be valuable, that she sort of gave me the heads up of, hey, you can stick around, but if you stick around, you're going to be the next person to get cut. And so to avoid that, my biggest advice to them is to grind and to make sure that you are valuable to your organization, because at the end of the day, doing all of that will help give you job security, but it also make you a better reporter. And I think those are both really important qualities.
Well, that's it, Matthew. We really appreciate you coming on here and taking your time out of your day to do this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
The East Carolinian proudly celebrates 100 years, marking a century of covering the stories of ECU, Greenville, and the surrounding areas. As part of this milestone, we invite you to join us throughout 2025 on a journey through our history. Our dedicated anniversary webpage offers a curated collection of nostalgic highlights, vintage articles, archive photos, and trivia.
In addition to these weekly updates, the pages serve as a gateway to exclusive 100th year anniversary merchandise, including a commemorative planner and t-shirt designed to honor these landmark occasions. Visit theeastcarolinian.com/100 again, theeastcarolinian.com/100.